So what I want to do now is spend a little bit of time seeing how we can tweak the structure of a my friend John technique so we have more vehicles. Because we don't want to be sitting there just talking about, oh, here's my friend Jack, and here's my friend Jill, and here's my friend John, and here's my friend Bob, and here's my friend, you know what I mean? It gets kind of a little bit, the pattern becomes a little bit too easy to recognize over time. Not to say that's not a good pattern, it's a fantastic pattern. And I know people who just use that and do fantastically well. But I like to have range so that you can express yourself hypnotically in many different environments. And when you don't happen to have a real friend called John who happens to have had the experience you want to put other people through, you'll be able to develop other vehicles, other anecdotes that can still be used in the same way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So here's what I call hypnotic lectures. There are two kinds, essentially, that I want to focus on with you guys. Direct lectures and indirect lectures. Let me just make sure this is off. A direct lecture is very simple. If you think about my friend John, it's basically you're telling someone about an experience. In a direct lecture, you're finding a topic that also allows you to give someone an experience. So a direct lecture just basically allows you to find a topic that has a kind of a natural trance theme embedded within it. For example, does anyone here know who Franz Anton Mesmer was? Yeah? Franz Anton Mesmer is the granddaddy, or the great-granddaddy, if you like, of hypnosis. He developed what's called mesmerism. And at the time, he thought it was some kind of magnetic fluid or influence that goes and passes between people. But really, it's the forerunner of what we now know as hypnosis. Of course, Mesmer thought just by looking at an individual, something would begin to happen inside them, a transference of an experience. Do you see where we're going with this right now? Yeah. Right? What other kind of topics would lend themselves to this sort of thing? Anyone heard of the Egyptian sleep temples? Right? Or the soothsayers in Greece, in ancient Greece, like the Oracle of Delphi? These are places where people would, I guess, predict the future or give advice. And in order for the priests to be able to do this, well, they went into a trance. In their sleep temples, guess what they did? Right? So if you want to talk to someone about solving problems in sleep, do you think that might be a useful historical fact to discuss? Or if you want people to have insight and inspiration, talk about, hey, if only we could go to the Oracle of Delphi. What's that? Well, let me tell you. Do you see where we're going with this? What other kind of topics would lend themselves to kind of a direct lecture, which have embedded within it a trance theme, so that you can just talk about hypnotic experiences without being so obvious about it or overt about it? Milton Erickson, right? The great psychiatrist Milton Erickson. There's a reason why a lot of hypnosis and NLP trainings talk about Milton Erickson all the time. Why? Because it allows them to put people in trance. It's a perfect vehicle for it, right? Go ahead.
Practicing Tai Chi.
Practicing Tai Chi, right? It's an inner art, and there's a whole bunch of internal experiences that are happening, and as a result of those, of course, you can talk about the shift to unconscious experienceness. Go ahead. No, next to you first. Can you use legends? I hope you do. They are some of my favorite things. In fact, after the break, if you like, I'll show you how to use legends to give people amazing hypnotic gifts. Because, by the way, legends, I don't know if you realize this, legends and fairy tales in particular are loaded with unconscious communication. There is actually one individual, one psychotherapist, who argues, and I think quite persuasively, that one of the problems with one of the reasons that teenagers nowadays feel so much angst compared to, I guess, yesteryear, is that all our fairy tales are being cleaned up. I mean, have you ever read the original Grimm fairy tales? There's a reason they're called Grimm, right? But the theory goes this: inside of the story, which is pretty, bad stuff happens. Children get a chance to experience the world being messed up in a way that's safe for them so they can process it. So when the emotions actually come and meet them in real life at some point, they already know how to deal with it. It's not the first time they've come across these things. So they're not as threatened by them. Does that kind of make sense? As a hypnotist, I find that argument very persuasive. So please go out and scare children, okay? With stories only. So Legends is excellent. Over here.
What about sensory deprivation?
A sensory deprivation tank, all the rage in the 70s, and still the subject of studies. Again, you can talk about scientific studies and research in this area. Phenomenal vehicle. We had some over here. Go ahead.
I'm actually borrowing this from Ralph. Music?
So he's just stolen something from Ralph, and it was music he stole. Yes, absolutely. Music is a great one, especially for people who are music lovers and talking about how people get carried away by it, or by great composers like Mozart who would hear music in his dreams, right? Or Bach, I think it was, who said that the problem isn't coming up with new symphonies. The problem is having enough time to write them all down, right? Over here.
How about gypsy magic?
Gypsy magic, absolutely. Especially if you have experience of what people actually do, the actual rituals and so on. Phenomenal, right?
Hypnosis, straight up hypnosis.
Absolutely. Although we don't want to use that word. It's a bad word, right? It's evil. It's a devil's work. Let's go over here.
I've read that people live their life in accordance with their favorite children's story.
So there's a point here that some people will live their lives in accordance with their favorite children's stories. I wouldn't actually be surprised by that. I mean, we know that we have unconscious blueprints that define how we live life. For example, did you know that most people, it's not true of everyone, but you can tell how long someone will live often by the age of their grandparents when they were born. Grandparents become a blueprint for old age. If they were significantly older, like in the 60s and 70s when the child was born, old age looked really old and frail, so people tend to live less long. If you had young grandparents in their 40s, then the mental picture of old age is a lot younger, a lot more vital, so people tend to live a little longer. That's just an unconscious expectation that's set there, and I can absolutely see children's stories setting an expectation. What is it not if unconscious formatting, exactly as we talked about a moment ago? Do you see how that works? I wouldn't necessarily say it's a universal thing, but I can actually absolutely see that being a relatively influential part of how people make up their reality, right? So we have some more suggestions in terms of taking direct lectures.
Sports and athletics.
Sports and athletics, especially when people get into the zone and all that sort of stuff, right? So we've got a pretty good handle on how a direct lecture works, do we not? Yes? So let's have a look at the indirect lecture. The advantage of an indirect lecture is you can absolve yourself of responsibility. For example, let us say that we took Mickey's suggestion and we're going to start talking about gypsy magic. But let's say our audience is a corporate audience or an academic audience, right? And they're going, their initial impression might be, gypsy magic, must be all fakery, and the critical factor may well switch on, so you don't even have the ability to go through the process of influencing, because the very topic might switch them off. Do you see how that works? What if you could distance yourself and your audience from the topic somewhat, so that they have the freedom to not have to overanalyze and reject the idea? Wouldn't that be interesting? So in an indirect lecture, essentially what we're doing is we're going to be using the same themes as in a direct lecture, only we're going to put it into a secondary vehicle that talks about the indirect lecture. It's not you talking about gypsy magic. It's not you talking about athletics. It's not you talking about sensory deprivation tanks. It's a TV program you saw that talked about this. It was an investigative report about gypsy magic. It was a film that centered around legends. It was an article that you read about Egyptian sleep temples. It was this crazy seminar you attended where the lecturer decided to talk about this weird stuff. Do you see where we're going with this? You're now putting responsibility for the statements into somebody else's mouth, so that if the credibility is at risk, it does not reflect on you, and that extra level of divorces, they won't have an argument with you whether or not that's right. It's just what other people believe, and hence, there's no real argument to that. Sure, if they believe that. How can you argue whether or not a TV program made a report on gypsy magic or not? Does that make sense? So it allows the mind to have that extra layer of dissociation And if there's a little layer of dissociation, they won't need to argue with it as much. Hence, the critical factor won't be as engaged as much, and so on. Do you see how the indirect lecture works?
Is it the equivalent of using the softening language to some extent?
So the question is that the equivalent of using softening language to some extent? And yes, although of course you can use a language throughout everything, but it has something similar. It's also similar to using the my friend John versus this is what happened to me, right? If it happened to me, you might argue, say, yes, but my life's different. Well, this is what happened to John. For some reason, people are less prone to argue with you. It's because, I think it's because they're more dissociated from the experience, so they're less, their intellect is less likely to engage critically with it. But I couldn't, there's no research that I've seen so far that will back that up. It's just my personal theory on that. So do you see how the direct and indirect lectures work? Go ahead in the back. Do you want to come up?
Obviously, the feedback mechanism that you're using to decide or differentiate between using direct and indirect comes from the person that you're discussing with. So as you begin to use a direct story, you can look at them and watch their body language and decide for yourself, too conservative, maybe going with gypsy magic directly was...
Sure, and although personally, it's just, honestly, I think I'll need to mix those two quite happily. If I think that the topic I want to introduce is a little bit more risky, I'll dissociate myself, I'll distance myself by making it more indirect. On the other hand, a lot of times I'll just give it up presented directly because I really don't mind assuming the responsibility for it. So it's just giving you that choice. I guess you could do it the way you suggested, but personally the way I've just used it in the past has been if the topic I wish to introduce, I have a feeling, given the context I'm in, would be more risky or more apt to be criticized or analyzed, then I'll indirect it one step by saying, oh, there's a seminar or an article I read and so on. If the context is appropriate, and I know the audience is warm to a particular theme, let's say I'm speaking with a more New Agey audience and I'm talking about the sleep temples, it fits their criteria, the way they look at the world quite neatly, then I'll happily just talk about it because I know it'll be accepted instantly.
Is there something more powerful about using the direct versus indirect? Because if there isn't, then why not just always go indirect? What's the benefit, the benefits of using either one?
At that level, honestly, I'm not sure there is a big difference. It just gives you more variety.
Okay.
And sometimes it's nice to actually be the author of some ideas.
Naturally.
Right?
Okay.
So, yeah, it's more a question of you having choice and range. If you want to be indirect each time and just talk about things you've read and seen and so on, by all means do so. There's really I don't think there's going to be any big difference in terms of the impact it has on people.
Okay, thank you.
All right? You're welcome. Any other comments or questions? All right, so you can basically see how the hypnotic lecture is just a variation of the My Friend John technique, isn't it? Right? We're now not talking about individuals, we're talking about ideas or historical facts or psychological facts or scientific facts or anything like that, and at various levels of indirection. So what we're going to do now, let's have a look on the time. Perfect. I'd like you to do now the same exercise you did a moment ago, find a different partner, only this time I'd like for you to present them with either a direct or an indirect lecture. If you want to mix the two together, by the way, you're welcome to do that too. So anything we've talked about so far, the legends, the sleep temples, anything that comes to your mind, feel free to explore it. Your overt purpose is just to inform or educate. Like, this is something crazy I found, or this is something interesting, or that reminds me of something I just heard or something I just did. And then just educate them or inform them in terms of the theme that you're using. And of course, your main purpose, your intention, is to switch on your H+ and allow the revivification, the pacing and leading, the conscious and conscious association, all these things to weave through what you're doing, so you create a nice, pleasant trance experience for them. Make sense? Now, if somewhere in the middle of that, you happen to slip into how connected people can be and how they can have people they love in their life and, I don't know, develop an inner smile, that might be okay. I can live with that. Can you? All right, guys, go ahead and have 6 minutes apiece. We'll come back, and then we'll have a lunch break. So it looks like you guys enjoyed yourselves. Yeah? Who likes the hypnotic lecture? Anyone? Is it good stuff? Good. I think it's time for a quick lunch break. Before we do that, we'd like to have a sneak preview of what the irresistible induction looks like. Yes? Okay. Let me show you the first step. Okay then, for the rest of it, I'll see you after lunch. All right, it's 20 past 12 now, so let's be back in the room at, we'll be starting at 10 to 2, so let's be back in the room a little bit before 10 to 2, all right? Off you go.